Hey, it's Andrew, and today on the show we have James Mulvany, founder and CEO of podcast.co and radio.co. In this episode, we talked about what drives James to keep building new companies in the content and streaming space, why the podcast industry is still full of untapped potential, and the importance of a personal touch in customer attention. We also discussed why James thinks world-class customer service is a key to resurrecting churned customers, why social media ads are underrated for retaining customers, and his biggest challenge in tackling churn and retention. As usual, I'm excited to hear what you think of this episode, and if you have any feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can email me directly on andrew@churn.fm. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, and enjoy the episode.
How do you build a habit-forming product?
You need to invest.
And we saw these different...
You don't just gun for revenue in the door.
This is churn.fm, the podcast for subscription economy pros. Each week, we hear how the world's fastest growing companies are tackling churn and using retention to fuel their growth.
How do you build a habit-forming product?
We crossed over that magic threshold to negative churn.
You need to invest in customer success.
It always comes down to retention and engagement.
Completely bootstrapped, profitable, and growing.
Strategies, tactics, and ideas brought together to help your business thrive in the subscription economy. I'm your host, Andrew Michael, and here's today's episode. Hey, James, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great. For the listeners, James is the founder and CEO of radio.co, a live streaming and radio management platform which powers over 4,000 channels around the world. James is also the founder of podcast.co, a platform for podcast publishing and distribution. They also have a services layer on top that works with leading brands, agencies, influencers, and individuals to help spread their message further using audio. Prior to radio.co and podcast.co, James also founded Wavestreaming, MCR Live, and CDNFI, which they built into leading CDN that they exited to SSL in May 2017. So my first question for you, James, is there's a clear theme in the companies that you founded. What drives you to keep building new companies in the content distribution and streaming space?
I think it's always been really exciting. The idea of actually broadcasting yourself and pushing your message out there, it's been one that kind of has always driven me. I really enjoy creating content as well as helping people grow their audiences. So I think that's probably why there's been a running theme. Plus also, it's just one of these things, you fall into a certain sort of trade almost. You learn all about that trade, you learn all about the industry, and it just makes it easy to spot opportunities, I think.
Yeah, you become an expert in the domain, and then from there,
exactly.
Scratching your own itch from the different problems that come up as a result.
But then, it's interesting you say what prompts you to keep starting businesses, because as an entrepreneur, that's what you do. And, I've had some successes, I've had some failures, I've had some really bad failures and some really good successes, So it's one of these things that I sometimes when I'm starting a new company, I'm like, oh, why am I putting myself through this again? But it's good fun. And, it's part of the challenge and part of the journey, really. We launched radio.co about 5 years ago in July 2015, after about a year of development. As we kind of progressed, more and more clients were coming to us saying, we want to start a podcast. Or a lot of our clients are obviously radio customers. So it's a logical progression for them to have a podcast. So initially we thought, okay, let's build it into radio.co. But the thing with the podcasting market, it's grown so much over the last 2-3 years. It's a really, proper exciting space to be in at the moment. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I think things are really just getting started. So it made more sense to roll it out as a separate business. Radio.co was kind of bootstrapped, and I sort of, effectively privately funded the development of that from my existing business. So with podcast.co, we actually took on some debt financing, because I was very much aware that you don't want to lose momentum or traction with one product. And also, we have some members of the team who work across both brands, but ultimately with the development, I was like, we need a new dev team to build podcast.co, because, there's so much stuff going on with radio.co, you don't want to sort of end up neglecting it. So it's very, very important to sort of hire a new dev team, start working on podcast.co, and also just expand the marketing and sales and support teams as well. So both products are taken care of, and both customer bases are obviously taken care of as well.
Yeah. So you sort of started out working together, and then slowly now really trying to separate the two and make their own.
Yeah. I mean, it's good because we're all based in the same office. There's about 30 members of the team between both brands. There is obviously a lot of crossover, so it's quite exciting being collaborative and sort of playing with different ideas and discussing how best promote each product. But I do think, it's good to have people who are devoted to each product as well, just so you've got that kind of clear separation. You can kind of keep things moving forward.
For sure. And you said as well, like, you think like the podcast industry is still in its infancy now. Like, I'm interested in what your thoughts are on this as well, because I think, like, you see every day new podcasts popping up, and a lot of people tend to think sort of the market is saturated and how many more podcasts can there be? But why do you feel that this is just the beginning?
Well, I think there's less than 1 million podcasts still. If you compare that to the number of Facebook pages or YouTube channels, which are in, tens or even hundreds of millions, right? Yeah. Less than 1 million podcasts. There's still so much opportunity there. There's so many people who come to me and say, James, is it too late to start a podcast? It's too saturated. I think that's a small amount. When you think about the internet in numbers, less than 1 million is nothing. That's why I think, number one, there's a good opportunity. And certainly also discoverability is becoming a lot better. I had this conversation with someone the other day where, Google have finally unveiled their sort of landing page for podcasts. If you go to podcast.google.com, it's kind of rubbish at the moment. But what Google do have is huge amounts of technology and processing power. So I think ultimately Google's still like the number one discovery engine on the internet for anything. I think podcasts are going to form a nice part of that, especially once they start. And they're doing this already, but it sort of becomes more and more, intelligent, the way that they can actually transcribe audio into sort of searchable text data and understand what's going on in that podcast. That's going to be a big game changer for people discovering. And of course, the listener numbers are just going to go up and up because of that.
Definitely, I can see that happening. Like, I use a service to transcribe the episodes afterwards, and it makes it searchable, so you can later then go and search for specific topics and areas. And part of that, I think, is a super powerful way. Is like me just searching for like onboarding, for example, and then I come across the 15 or 20 or 30 episodes where onboarding was mentioned, and be able to sort of group and collect those ideas together is really powerful. So I can see that playing out in search really, really well too. So the other thing I noticed as well, like your businesses, I think they really sit at the core fundamental place. So the products that you've built are really like day-to-day use products. You can't just sit and forget in a way, like you need to be on them all the time.
Correct.
Do you think this has sort of helped you into the type of business you're working when it comes to churn and retention? Like, what do your numbers look like? You don't have to talk about specifics, but I mean, do you think this has definitely given you an edge when it comes to churn and retention, having businesses that are like fundamental to running the companies or the shows that these people use you for?
I think so. One of the things that we noticed very early on with radio.co was people will sign up and, they might be at a kind of discovery stage where they're just thinking about starting up, but they're not necessarily ready to commit. So it's important. And then obviously we launched radio.co and it was kind of brand new to the marketplace. There wasn't a lot of other competing solutions, whereas now there are more competing solutions. So we've got effectively people take us for a spin and they'll go elsewhere. They might try a competitor's product. We provide, the world-class customer support. So we find that's a big driver to keep people bringing back. But the other thing which we found has helped massively is just retaining customer data. So once someone hasn't paid, they cancel their account, rather than just like saying, okay, see you later, we're never going to see you again. We assume that person may want to come back, and we keep the data for a period of time. I think it's 60 days. And, during that 60-day period, we'll just touch base with them, not like being sort of high pressure sort of sales guys, but just basically saying, listen, we've still got your account data. If you want to reactivate, you can do so. And, you'd be amazed to see the number of people that then say, okay, we want to reactivate. But the benefit of that is everything they've spent time doing, playlists they've created, media files they've uploaded, we've got all of that there. So they don't need to start redoing that all over again. And they can just really, pick up where they left off. And that kind of then says, I think 60 days is long enough where, during that period of time, if they've tried a customer support from one of our competitors and decided, yeah, these guys are not very responsive, let's go back to radio.co, which does happen a lot, it allows them to come back and sort of pick up where they left off, and that sort of reduces that sort of friction. I think it's really important.
For sure. It sounds like an exciting idea. The one thing that sort of triggered to mind as well when you said it now again is in the context of GDPR and like data protection, and how are you communicating this to your users when they're canceling their accounts or deleting, to make sure that you're sort of in compliance with GDPR and their data rights?
I mean, let's not go there. I'm not an intellectual property expert. I don't want to say anything that's going to land us in trouble. I'm pretty sure we've got it in our terms and conditions. And obviously we I think it's probably in the cancellation email that we keep it there, but I don't want to really get into GDPR as a topic. It's just
No, absolutely not. But
yeah.
I think as a concept that's very, very interesting in terms of trying to win back customers is like we often just sort of lose them and forget about them. And I think resurrection itself is very, very difficult just in the nature that someone's made up their mind to actively quit and leave your product. Trying to win them back is difficult. But like you say, in the nature of going out, trying something else, and then realizing, okay, maybe I made a mistake, I need to go back. Having that sort of slate and ready to get up and running can be a very, very powerful motivator to win them back as well.
Yeah, I think it depends again on the kind of platform you're running. With the SaaS model, it's great, you've got predictable revenue, etc. But then ultimately, I think a lot of companies forget that there's more than one solution out there, and customers don't necessarily make their mind up on day one. You need to remind people that you're still around. Sometimes we've seen customers who have kind of inquired and then they've not actually signed up for like a couple, 2-3 months sometimes. And this is where I think retargeting comes into play, because one of the things we've always been big on is content. We like to deliver value to the marketplace as a whole, and build goodwill in the kind of the market, if you like, because I think that helps with brand awareness. But also, let's say someone's thinking about starting a radio project. Well, it's not generally like a decision you make on a Tuesday afternoon, right? It's something you might think about for a couple of months. You might have the idea that you'd like to do that, but not really have a full grasp over the concept that you want to create. So, using retargeting, making sure you're delivering constant value to the marketplace really helps people, helps solidify your brand in people's minds.
And keep you top of mind. Yeah, we actually talked about this recently with Nathan Barry from Convertkit. And they have an email marketing service that helps you to build lists and target users and create landing pages.
Yeah.
And very much they sort of figured out as well, like they had this huge amount of people sort of coming in, trying to test out the product or just curiosity, but then weren't really ready for it. So they started to build on services on top, like the landing page to be able to start collecting. And I can definitely see it in your case as well when it comes to Radio Co or Podcaster Co. Even people out of curiosity want to start checking out what's in the market, what's going on before they're actually even ready to get started.
And again, interestingly, I've actually started using Convertkit for my personal brand. We use a few different other services for radio and podcasts, but so far good experience. And they've done a really good job in terms of providing value. I think they have lots of in-app messaging, which sort of prompts you to do certain things. So yeah, it's quite a cool product. And I think email marketing again is a really powerful thing. It's still very relevant. Obviously, your open rates and stuff aren't as good as they were like 5-6 years ago, but this is why I think you need to take more of a cross-platform strategy and look at delivering video via socials and stuff as well. When we launched radio.co, email marketing was sort of still king, whereas I think less so now perhaps. You can stay in touch with people who have been on your site using things like retargeting and being more intelligent about your pay-per-click strategy. So one of the sort of methodologies we're adopting at the moment for advertising is, rolling out video as ads, just to kind of engage with those sort of top funnel type people. They might be interested in your product. They might have been to your site once and then bounced and gone elsewhere. Well, if you show them content that's relevant to them or relevant to your business, and then you see that they're engaging with it, Facebook allows you to actually profile an audience based on people who have watched X percentage of your videos. So those people immediately are engaged, right? And I think that's such a powerful strategy, but you don't need to really know who that person is. You don't need to have their email address or have their contact details. But ultimately, you'll end up getting that if you're showing them more and more relevant content.
For sure. And I think it's a very, very underutilized channel when it comes to general retention, is actually sort of using social channels and using even ads like Facebook for engagement and updates. Because I think, like you say, like email is definitely, it's one channel, but it's saturated to a large extent. But at the same time as well, it's like if you're basically just basing your strategy just on email, you're only choosing one channel where people are consuming information and data, and it might not be an individual's preference. They might really be wanting to consume their news or updates in social channels or in things like LinkedIn. So
yeah, I think the main important thing to think about when it comes to churn is, just because someone has cancelled their account does not mean you have lost them as a customer for good.
Yeah. I think this is always, it's a tough one. And I think like when we think about churn and retention, the biggest opportunities are always, I think people gravitate towards onboarding and working on new customers, because I think once you sort of get to that point where someone's made up their mind around your customer, like, and they've actively decided to quit, it's a lot harder to turn their psychology around than it is to try and excite a new person who just arrived to your product and educate.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think, this is the thing. I think, of course, you've got to nurture your new leads, definitely. But then, as I say, just because someone's cancelled, I know what you're saying. It's hard to turn the psychology around, but then, I think that people maybe just don't think about that, because it's certainly it's relevant for radio.co. And interestingly, on the flip side with podcast.co, although it's still relatively young as a business, we're seeing a lot less churn. I think because once someone's got their podcast set up, they kind of just tend to leave it. Whereas with radio, quite a lot of people, it'll be kind of a project that they sort of come back to.
Yeah. I think with podcasts, well, it's quite a difficult one to churn. I think is also because the unknowns as well of what happens, like moving and switching between providers, and every website states that they do it, but you're never quite sure like how it's going to impact distribution and listens. And so I think it's almost one of those ones where you got it out of fear.
Yeah, like the kind of if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah, good point.
I had a case like this recently with my provider. I won't mention any names, but they had a really bad email that was sent out when a credit card was declined. What happened was I had my company account, I got a new card for it, and then the month went and I had forgot to update it on the hosting provider. And I received an email notification to say that your account has been suspended and your data will be deleted in 30 days if you do not update your card or anything like that. So you can imagine, like, I sort of panicked immediately thinking, okay, shit, now is like the podcast not up? Are people not able to access the content? I think this was even on the day, like, and then actually I reached out to the support and they explained to me, no, that's not the case. You just need to update your account in the next 30 days before. But I think one in comms was really, really bad. But even in that moment, I was thinking, okay, like I really need to switch because this is just not on, like what they're wanting. But even in that moment, I was thinking, okay, but what are the switching costs? And I think that's like going back to earlier points, having one of these businesses where you're a fundamental component of that person's business. It's very, very difficult to just sort of uproot yourself and move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as obviously it's kind of like the Holy Grail. If you're building a SaaS platform, the more and more you can kind of become ingrained with what the person is doing, a customer, the more likely they are to stay. So obviously there's a good benefit as a business to doing that. It's interesting you say that, because like I think there's two different ways you can kind of go for like cancellations or trying to deal with people who have perhaps missed a payment. Like ultimately, sometimes if you kind of send an email that's a bit shocking and kind of opens their eyes, sometimes it has more effect in that it can prompt the user to actually take action, saying, I don't want to lose my service, I best put my card details in. But it's interesting you say that it actually had the reverse effect with you, kind of rubbed you up the wrong way, and actually were like, oh, these guys just being kind of aggressive with this. Yeah,
I think you got to think about the context as well. It's coming from, like, I got a new card, I just completely forgot to update. It's not like I didn't want to pay for the service or for it. Or the flip, if it was the case where I didn't have money, it's like, okay, this person's maybe obviously struggling, and now you sort of like going to cut them off there. I think I don't think anybody actively says, I don't want to go and pay for a service. I'm just going to see how I can get a free ride for as long as possible. So I think, like,
no, I'm sure it happens sometimes, but I guess what you mean. I think ultimately customers are really important, and I think again there's an opportunity there, which is why customer success in our products is really important. We try and deliver as much value as possible when we're speaking to people. We actually give people the time of day. They can book a call with us or book a demo, because I think it makes a big difference between customers that are happy and more likely to stay. Like, let's say just someone doesn't understand like one feature, they're getting confused with it. Well, if you give them rather than just directing them to a help desk article, which sometimes is fine, but if you actually show them how to use that feature and kind of hold their hand through that, it can make the difference between that customer then being a customer for a couple of months versus a couple of years.
Yeah, and how are you doing that? Is that one-to-one conversations or?
Yeah, so we use sort of a standard calendar booking system, and we'll take either phone calls or video calls. We don't have like an incoming number that clients can call, because we've tried that in the past. We just find it gets too crazy because we are a relatively small team. So we allow customers to book time with either customer success or with technical support. And it does help, again, especially in those early days when someone's new to the platform. They're trying to get their heads around everything, and actually there's obviously going to be some learning curve for clients.
For sure.
And you can provide all the resource and training materials in the world, but sometimes actually having that call with someone just makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. I think having sort of that personal touch to it, either putting like a voice or a face in some cases to the brand and to the company, definitely goes a long way in sort of building their brand loyalty as well.
Yeah, and also we try and take on people who are passionate about the topic. So we're really lucky because we're based in Manchester, and there's 3 universities here, and one of them has a course called television and radio. So from that course, we've had so many interns, we've hired quite a few staff, and we also take part in actually delivering one of the lectures for the radio module as well, which is cool. But that's, we've got a kind of a readily available source of really sort of passionate members of staff from that course who kind of understand the radio and podcasting and audio production thing, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And as a result, they're so much happier to speak to clients about their ideas, and they understand what clients actually want, versus someone who's just perhaps worked in a generic customer service role for a different industry, if that makes sense. So I think again, having people who are kind of passionate in your team, it stands for a lot.
Yeah, we spoke about this recently as well, I think with Ziv Palad and also with Julie Hogan from Drift and Zivs from AppsFlyer. Like, so in the early days, having somebody who's really keen, motivated, like energetic, enthusiastic about the topic goes a long, long way in serving the customer as well. So it's not just another job. It's more like, this is my passion, and let me see how I can help my customers better. Yeah,
and also it's a deeper understanding of the customer, what's going on in the customer's mind, I guess.
Yes, having empathy. It rules. Yeah, so we have been running a little bit short on time, but I wanted to ask you, sort of running now the different companies that you've been going through over the years, what has been like the biggest challenge that you've had to face when it came to churn and retention? And you can pick any company, and then how did you sort of work your way through that with the team and with the company?
I think the differences that I've just talked about, when we used to run Wavestreaming, which was similar to radio.co, served the similar market. It was not as much of a platform versus, we sold a lot of different tools and it was more like B2B, whereas radio.co is a mix of B2B and B2C. We learned a lot of lessons, I think, from that, and how we dealt with customers, how we dealt with churn and retention, all that sort of thing. And back then, I said to you now, encouraging customers to come back has been a big sort of a game changer for radio.co. Back then, like, we'd cancel clients, and from our perspective, we really sort of had to shift our mindset, because back then it was like, okay, you cancelled, you're no longer a customer, see you later. So that, I think, has been a big lesson learned. And also just stuff like retaining the data, because back then we'd have clients who wouldn't pay for services, and then they would get cut off and we wouldn't pay. And then we had to complain because their data was obviously all missing. And then, of course, we wouldn't get them back as a customer. So those things, I'd say, were the biggest challenges back then. And that's kind of how we overcame them.
Nice. And then the question I ask everyone that joins the show is, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario now that you've joined a new company and you've been tasked to try and churn and retention around. It's not doing great. And you've been asked to try and get some results quick. You have 90 days to try and turn things around, or at least show some traction. What would be some of the first things you'd want to do at this company in the first 90 days?
Okay, so first of all, I would try and run a survey and just generally ask some questions around what customers felt about the service they're receiving, the product itself. Just try and get a feel for what the general vibe was from the audience. I would then try and have some conversations with people who would answer the survey either in like a very positive light or a very negative light. So, try and find out what the people who answered in a positive way, what do they like about the platform? What is it doing well? What's good about the customer service? And obviously then you can get some good valuable feedback from people who said, no, this isn't working for me. I don't like this, and this. And, I think that would be the first thing I would attempt to do. Also, implementing better communication, making everything more personable, showing people's faces on your chat widget within, Intercom or whatever you're using within the app, I think is a really cool thing to do. having some kind of names at the bottom of your emails, just little things like that, details where customers know they're actually speaking to a person. That's the sort of stuff I would look at to begin with. Then also, look at the metrics, dive into, your churn rate, dive into, look at the growth metrics of your monthly recurring revenue, and just try and get a really good understanding of what's going on there, and try and sort of draw some parallels between what the figures are showing and what's going on in the customer's minds, because I think they're always going to be connected, right?
Yeah. So you're taking that sort of qualitative, quantitative approach and trying to holistically understand what the problem is. I like the fact as well that you mentioned sort of that making yourself more personal and really making sure that you're putting your faces and names to the company. I think it's
it stands for a lot,
Yeah. We often forget, and I think you mentioned it, I don't know if it was just before the show, but you wanted to be like hands off, and then realizing sort of this, you actually need to create these one-to-one connections, to create this brand and this empathy towards customers.
I think as well, it's just how the internet is morphed. Like 10 years ago when I kind of was getting started, there was very much just like this perception that if you bought services from a website, it was just this anonymous website. You didn't have contact details for them, or, you might have an email address. And, you got through to a generic help desk, and there was very much just like that perception. And the industry, a lot of the software industry back then was very much like that. I think nowadays there's a lot more personality and branding generally of software companies online, and also, a desire to provide, better customer services and also make your processes more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also maybe comes down to trust as well. Like the internet as well, I think for a lot of people, it's now it's passing the early majority. And at this point, like people want a more complete product. They want to feel that they can trust what they're investing in. And
trust 10 years ago meant having a big badge on your site that said, "We are using a secure connection," right? That was the idea of trust. Trust now is showing, what you're capable of how you're capable of helping the customer and taking them on their journey and really solving their problems, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually being trustworthy now, not just talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, James, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with, any way they can keep up to speed with what you're working on?
Yeah, of course. So if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, my name is James Mulvany. And one of the things I do on LinkedIn is a weekly live show every Wednesday lunchtime called Working Lunch, where we speak to different people who are, in business, in marketing. And really the idea is they bring 3 concepts to the table around the idea of growing your business, growing your team, or growing your audience. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, etc. If you search for my name, James Mulvany. One of the things I've been doing this year is really trying to focus on growing my personal brand. So I'm trying to push out as much useful content as I can and help as many people as possible.
Excellent. I just sent a request now on LinkedIn to connect.
Oh, cheers, Andrew. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me on the show. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I wish you best of luck now going forward.
Okay, cheers.
And that's a wrap for the show today with me, Andrew Michael. I really hope you enjoyed it and you were able to pull out something valuable for your business. To keep up to date with churn.fm and be notified about new episodes, blog posts, and more, subscribe to our mailing list by visiting churn.fm. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have any feedback, good or bad, I would love to hear from you. And you can provide your blunt, direct feedback by sending it to Andrew at churn.fm. Lastly, but most importantly, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it and leave a review, as it really helps get the word out and grow the community. Thanks again for listening. See you again next week.